Hello everyone and welcome to the Unanswered Questions True Crime Podcast.
I have spent hours and hours investigating this.
He basically told her that people have been killed. Journalists, independent investigators, people like that disappeared. It frightened her to the bone.
There's more to the story than meets the eye.
There were rumors of torture and homicide and sexual abuse, all sorts of egregious, horrendous crimes.
He was polygraphed 3 times. Each of those 3 showed evasions.
His resumes were a skeleton of truth.
He was mad at the world, and particularly mad at the government.
The study that he commissioned had described a fictional terrorist attack.
If people have died over this, it means you're getting close to the truth.
You don't have to be a conspiracy theorist to say, what the fuck?
Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of my new podcast, Unanswered Questions, where every week we will endeavour to discuss a mysterious unsolved case that has many lingering unanswered questions. So I hope you enjoy, and as always, leave me some feedback on what you think about the show and rate it as well. Now on to the show. This week we'll be talking about the mysterious death of Corey Sherby.
Corey, at the time of his death, was 38 years old. He was a logger, which is a really tough job if you're up and down the mountain constantly. And one slip of a tiny error and it can kill yourself or other workers. So it's a huge responsibility and a tough job. He was physically fit and he was a very good looking man. He was about 5'9" or 10, about 180 pounds with solid muscle. He always had this infectious smile and he was always upbeat. He loved life. He was always cheery. I never saw Corey ever in a bad mood, ever. He was that kind of person. He was very positive.
On August 22nd of 2011, a woman named Gladys Sherby came to visit her son Corey Sherby in Chilliwick, British Columbia in Canada. It was a regular visit in a similar way Gladys had visited her son many times, but no one answered her doorbell that day, or knocks for that matter. Then Gladys remembered that she had a copy of the keys to her son's house and decided to enter on her own. What she saw inside left a scar in her heart for life and later launched a dark and mysterious conspiracy theory on the internet, which still has no answers. In the living room, Corey's already cold and numb body was kneeling next to the couch. His head lay face down on the sofa cushion, and everything around Corey's body, including the entire sofa, was filled with a very dark, almost black liquid, which turned out to be Corey's blood.
Gladys found the body initially. It was not a natural resting position by any stretch of the imagination. He was bent sharply at the waist, face down in the leather couch, his face pushed far down between 2 couch cushions to the point where only the very back of his head was visible.
He was kneeling at the end of his sofa, face down with arms on either side of his body. It was almost like it was staged or positioned. It wasn't a natural way of collapsing or falling from people or experts we talked about when somebody gets ill and they fall. This was not a common way for somebody to fall after something traumatic happened. She could just see the top of his head, and then she gently went behind him, put her arms underneath his armpits, and pulled him back and laid him on the floor. The details of what she saw was not very pleasant. She didn't recognize who it was as she laid this body down. And she just could see all this pool of blood, all over on the couch. Gladys ended up collapsing and the ambulance was called and they had to take her to the hospital because it was just so horrific what she had experienced.
She said his eyelids were white. His face was white, his nose was blue, and there was no hair on the top of his head. And she said his ears actually even seemed to be missing. There was a horrific scene that 2 years after it happened, Gladys recounted it to me in tears. And every year since then, when we've talked, she talks about it as if it was yesterday. So it was a pretty gruesome scene.
When Gladys Sherby moved away from horror, she found the strength to turn her son's body upside down, and the look on his face scared her even more. The man's face was completely white, and instead of ears, There were no ears. Quote, I could not find his ears. I held his head in my hand, but I could not feel the ears. I only felt holes. End quote, the woman later said. Inside the house, she later saw many bloody footprints, and only after that she recovered from the shock a little, ran out of the house and started calling the police. When the police arrived, cordoned off Corey's house and began to inspect the crime scene, the first thing they found was that there was no sign of a break-in.
The initial investigating officer found no signs of trauma to the body, no sign of a struggle, no signs that he was stabbed or shot, and no signs of forced entry.
They also did not see the bloody footprints anywhere, although Gladys could see them clearly in all of the rooms and told about them on the phone when she called. This was the first strange incident. Then the police found a strange piece of evidence in the hallway. It encompassed an empty cardboard pizza box with a marker written, "Better be a funeral." What this meant and whether this phrase was associated with Corey's death remains unclear. Then the pathologist began to study Corey's body and found that there were no signs of external violent injuries, and there were no signs that Corey had fought with anyone before dying. He died approximately 48 hours before his mother found his body. At the same time, the pathologist did not find out where so much of Corey's blood could have flowed out from, and in the end decided that it was from some natural hole in the body.
With the blood and everything that drained from there, that went right through the couch, underneath the couch, on his shag carpet by his couch. It was a width about, with it swirling in and out, about 7 feet wide by 17 feet long.
There was a large pool of blood. In fact, it was said by the authorities probably most of Corey Sherby's blood had left his body and was on the floor, along with decomposition fluid and a mix of blood and decomposition fluid.
One review of the case that was done concluded that it was, in quotes here, not an unusual amount of bodily fluids in relation to a body well into the process of decomposing.
The blood didn't drip. The blood poured out like Niagara Falls, like 2 gallons of blood across the living room floor. And there's blood splatter above the ceiling where Corey's rocking chair is. I mean, how do you explain that?
There was some reddish residue in the bathroom, in the bathtub, which appeared that it could be blood related. The police said it looked more like soap scum to them. And again, they didn't test it or look at it or determine for certain what it was. There were smudges of blood on some of the door frames, in particular the door frame to the stairs down to the front entrance of the house, as if somebody had blood on their hand and was leaning up against the door frame. But that wasn't really tested or followed up on. There is evidence in the photographs of some blood on the air conditioner next to the couch, but it's, again, very difficult to know how these substances got there when they were never really analyzed.
The police said the blood splatter was from the decomposition of his body, and the flies were landing on the fluid or the blood and then would fly around and they would land in other areas.
One would think that if there was blood splattered on the ceiling or on the air conditioner, that there would have been more of an investigation into that. There wasn't. And again, this is what bothers the Sherbys, and this is what makes it confusing. And again, it raises this somewhat suspicion that makes the Sherbys very upset and just begs the question, where was the blood found exactly, and how much was there, and how did it get there?
The coroner eventually signed the cause of death as an acute combination of cocaine and ethanol intoxication. The pathologist oddly did not indicate anything about the missing ears of the deceased, about which Corey's mother repeatedly mentioned and still insists on this. There was nothing about these ears in the report of the investigator either. Error or deliberate concealment? When Gladys Sherby called the police, she also managed to call her relatives, and they arrived as soon as they could, not much ahead of the police. And these relatives assured the police that they also saw bloody prints everywhere in the house, and there were also many around the house and bloody stains on the doorknob.
You just stand in the hallway, there's 3 sets of footprints down the hallway, down the stairs, and there's footprints going to the patio door. I mean, how do you explain that?
It wasn't just one set of footprints. There was a second one. One was about a size 7, we figured by measurements, and the other one was about an 8.5, 9. But they were heading to the bathroom from the hallway, from the dining room and living room, dining room area, heading down to the hallway to the bedrooms. And then all of a sudden they were taking a right turn to the master bedroom. and all of a sudden they disappeared.
There was also some footprints in blood around other parts of the house. For example, going towards the kitchen, which is where the needles were found in the garbage can, and going towards the bathroom, which was across on the other end of the house. The footprints appeared to be multiple sizes and multiple types of footwear.
Somebody was there when he died, and somebody also was there after, because the bloody footprints were from after the decomposition. Somebody had been through that house, and the police had used the excuse that the house was locked. But they don't realize that Corey had remote control garage doors. You can walk out your landing garage door, press the garage door open, the door opens, and then as you're going to head out, just push the button and you're running, you're out, and the house is locked. So there was different ways of getting in and out. The police kept on saying there wasn't, but there was.
And Uncle Corey, Marty Jordan, saw something else. Quote, "I was struck by the bloody footprints on the stairs and the huge pool of blood on the floor, but the worst thing was to find a piece of my nephew's head lying on the floor in the middle of the living room." End quote.
Regarding the crime scene after the investigation was taken care of, it was really a mess. It was disgusting. What is also extra unusual, and to be generous, were at best unfortunate, part of his scalp was left behind. The scalp was still on the floor. Gladys found it when they went back to the house again. Showed me a photograph of it, which was not nice to see. Skin comes off after a certain level of decomposition. You can see in some of the crime scene photos, you can see the skin on his back is sliding off almost. The skin just starts to do that at a certain point of decomposition. And given all the other questions in this case, it didn't help damping down any suspicions that the Sherbys had that something bad happened, because it just looked like such a horrific mess after the fact.
Needless to say, not a word of this was said about this separately lying piece of skull in the report of the police, the pathologist, or the coroner. There was also a bag containing some type of substance found in the bathroom and some syringes, but the police never tested any of these to verify what the substance was that was in them.
As for drug paraphernalia, there was a bag, a Ziploc bag, that the police speculated may have contained drugs, but it was never tested or looked at for what it might have contained. And that was found in another portion of the floor. It was not in the vicinity of the body. I believe it was in the bathroom. There were also 2 used needles found in a garbage can, empty used needles. And it's significant in the autopsy report, there was no needle marks found on the body. So whoever used those needles, it wasn't Corey Sherby.
There was the needles in the garbage can just sitting right on top. And then supposedly the police had found a black baggie in the toilet with tinfoil that they said is definitely things that drug users use.
The city of Chilliwick is about 100 kilometers to the east of Vancouver, which is obviously the main city in British Columbia. It's considered a rural community. It's an agricultural community, but the population is growing. It's the fastest growing city in BC. There's about 100,000 people here. The drug situation in Chilliwack is like a lot of other communities. We're in the middle of an opioid crisis for sure, the way that all of Canada and probably most of the world is. There is a lot of cocaine. Some of the main gangs here are involved in the cocaine trade in the Fraser Valley, centered in Chilliwack.
Naturally, none of the members of Corey's family believed the version about cocaine and ethanol. Corey did not drink or take drugs at all. His dad was also quoted as saying, "Drugs and alcohol? Corey was such a guy that he didn't even take aspirin." End quote. When they began to find out which of the relatives was last to see Corey alive, it turned out that it was August 19th, just 3 days before his death. According to Corey's father, the day he stopped by his son to grab a couple of burgers for lunch and saw an unfamiliar woman in the house with Corey. This woman was dressed in a leather jacket and light sneakers, but Corey's father did not have time to look at her in more detail since Corey did not answer the question of what kind of lady she was, but instead hurriedly brought him a bag of burgers, said goodbye, and quickly closed the door in front of his nose. Corey's father told the police about this strange woman, but they seemed to ignore his testimony altogether. In any case, none of the investigators looked for this woman, and she is not indicated anywhere in the official reports.
I rang the doorbell, and the door was open, and I says, "Hey, Corey, I hope you made supper for you. I got you a couple of hamburgers." And up the stairwell I go up, and on the top of the stairs, and there's a strange girl stays there. "Here I am." I says, "Oh, Corey, I'm sorry you had company." And he didn't say anything. He was kind of blushing, and he put the hamburgers on the bottom of the stairs. I says, "Well, keep the door locked." Yeah, same old thing, And that was Friday night. And I told Gladys, I says, "There's a strange girl there." I says, "She looks a little bit kind of spooky. Maybe we should go and find out who she is." She says it's 9:45. Why bother him,
The taxi driver received a call from Corey Sherby's residence to pick up a passenger around shortly before 10 o'clock on the Friday night. So this would have been probably just a few minutes after Edward was there. The taxi driver observed a male and a female coming out of the residence. He didn't know either of them. He was unable to identify either of them. He drove them to downtown Chilliwick, what I believe was described as not the best neighborhood, where the male asked him to stop but stay on call as he would need a ride back. Got out of the vehicle. The female departed, and then the male got back into the taxi with a second female, who, again, the taxi driver did not know or recognize. And the two of them asked for a ride back to Corey Sherby's residence, where he let them off. This whole encounter took a few minutes, is my understanding. And again, it's really not clear whether the male was Corey Sherby. Although the taxi driver did say that he may have had something different about his voice. He said the voice was unusual, perhaps a speech impediment, and Corey Sherby did not have a speech impediment. The taxi driver also said that this male did not appear to be intoxicated. He said it was something different from intoxication. The taxi driver simply didn't know if it was Corey Sherby or not. I'm not sure if he was shown a photograph of Corey by the police. I do know he was shown photographs of several known prostitutes in the Chilliwick area to see if those were the women involved, and he could not positively identify them as any of the street workers that he was familiar with. And as a taxi driver who regularly took fares in downtown Chilliwick, he would have been familiar with the street workers in that neighborhood. The fact that the taxi driver remembers this shows us with certainty that there were other people present on the night that Corey is believed to have died. It suggests that there was comings and goings. There was a woman who left and another woman who arrived. We don't know who these people are. So it just supports the fact that there's something more to this than just a guy dying alone at home of a drug overdose. There was interaction going on throughout the evening.
Corey's parents also mentioned other strange and bizarre instances that had also taken place. For instance, Corey was said to have been involved in some type of financial dispute involving real estate and was having trouble getting his money back. However, when his father asked him more about it, Corey refused to say anything more.
The Sherbys, with their private investigator, dug up some evidence that Corey had been investing in a real estate project and had lent out a substantial amount of money. And the day of his death on the Friday, earlier in the day, Edward had spoken to Corey, and Corey had said that he was having some kind of disagreement about a real estate deal, but didn't really give him any details.
Realizing that something completely incomprehensible was happening, the Corey family began to send letters to the courts and the police asking them to reconsider the investigation into Corey's death and take into account all the evidence. However, they received almost no answers to these letters, and if they did, then with different formal replies. In the eyes of others, it turned out that Corey died of drugs and alcohol, period. The case was closed and could not be reconsidered. Then other strange things started happening. Corey's childhood friend, for example, Tammy Burden, who had been friends with Corey since kindergarten and who had known each other all their lives, suddenly came to the house of Corey's parents in December 2011 and looked very worried and scared. She stammered to say that Corey had definitely not died from drugs and that he was in fact killed, and that the same person who had killed him wanted to kill her too. The scary part about this was that Tammy also mentioned that Corey's girlfriend knew about what happened or was involved, and Tammy was so mad about it. She at one point made a statement saying she was so mad at Corey's girlfriend she could stab her with a pitchfork, and Corey's mother told her that was a bit drastic, and she replied, and I quote, "Another thing I'm telling you, if they knew I was talking to you, I'd be next," end quote. Sadly, 3 months later, on February 3rd of 2012, Tammy Burden was found dead in her house. The official cause of death was a sudden death from blood poisoning following an accidental cut on the finger with a knife. This ruling has to be one of the most bizarre I've ever heard of. In all my time researching and producing this podcast and beyond, I have never heard of a case where such a ruling was made, and I find it particularly disturbing and very interesting that not long after she talked with Corey's parents, she died under what I can only describe as one of the most odd and bizarrest of circumstances. She also made the claim that she would be killed, and in a way she did what Princess Diana did and predicted that she would be killed, which is even more chilling.
Tammy was a girl that Corey knew right from elementary school. He'd known her all her life. And she lived not far from Ed and Gladys. And when Corey died, she came a few times, late hours. I guess she was upset, and she was telling them that somebody murdered Corey. She says, and his girlfriend knows about it. She knows about it, or she's responsible. And I said, well, what are you talking about? And she says, I know. She says, I'm so mad at her and I'm so angry. And she started shaking more. She says, if I had a pitchfork, I would stab her. And I said, Tammy, that's been pretty dramatic. She says, no, she knows or she's responsible. And I says, I don't know what to say about this. And she says, another thing I'm telling you, if they knew I was talking to you, I'd be next. This was in September when she told me this. And a few months later, February, she was dead. Found dead on her floor.
And I says, well, how did she die from? How did she die? She said she was cut her finger and she got blood poisoning. I says, what? And that's what that was left at, that she died from blood poisoning or something. It was kind of hard to believe.
The real question is, what was the motive behind having Corey killed, and what role did his girlfriend have to play in this case? Well, Corey's girlfriend was also a very interesting character in and of herself. For example, her mother recalled that at Corey's funeral, his girlfriend at the time was beside herself with grief, and his mother found this bizarre because she said she'd been to so many funerals and she had never seen someone so overcome with emotions like Corey's girlfriend was.
At his funeral, his girlfriend was just hysterically crying and shaking and trembling. And that was the first I saw of her since Corey's death. I just found that really unusual. I've been to many funerals and saw people grieve, but I never saw anybody that was acting like his girlfriend was. It was almost like she was shaking so hard, like out of being scared or fear.
Corey's mother also talked about how Corey's girlfriend was very controlling, to the point that if they made plans and Corey was late for any reason, even 5 minutes, she would blow up his phone and call him non-stop, which is significant because the girlfriend stated that Corey was supposed to meet up with her on this particular day and he no-showed, meaning he didn't turn up, and she said so nonchalantly that it didn't bother her and she just assumed that he was busy, which didn't fit with her personality really and how their relationship was seen as by others. To my knowledge, she was never investigated by the police, and to this day, her role in this case remains disputed.
He had a girlfriend for about 10 years. She was very likable, very pretty. She was very possessive, very controlling when it came to Corey, but he loved her, and that was obvious. He could not let go of her, even at the rocky times of their arguing, and that he said, I love her, and she said she loved him. Friday evening, when Corey was still alive, she had talked to him and they were to have lunch on Saturday. In the past, if they had a luncheon date and he didn't show up, all heck broke loose. And it was when we got the records of the cell phone, and I'm looking, She had not tried reaching out. Where are you? I thought we were having a lunch date. Nothing. And then all of a sudden, the record shows she phoned around 8 o'clock that Monday night. And I knew that was terribly out of character from their relationship, because if he didn't show up, she tried to phone him, or she would go over and try and figure out why. And of course, at that time, we started wondering, well, did she go over? Did she see something? We're just baffled by it. She came up with a comment that Corey and her had this arrangement. They'd make plans, they'd go for lunch or this and that, but if one didn't show up, it didn't matter. We just went on with our daily routines and made other plans elsewhere. That was never the case in, like I say, 10 years or more in their relationship. Never.
Corey's girlfriend at the time did give statements to the police. She said at the time, shortly after his death, that she was shocked by his death. She clearly seemed to believe that it was something more than just an accident. She didn't know him to be using drugs in the days leading up to his death. She did say that she spoke to him on the phone every day, and she never noticed him being intoxicated or going down a road of extreme drug abuse.
Things got even more frightening when in 2014, someone sent an anonymous letter to Corey Sherby's family in the mail, and it read, and I quote, "Dear Mr. and Mrs. Sherby, Shakespeare said, the fury in hell is nothing compared to the abandoned woman, aka hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. Those who know what it is will keep quiet. I think that your son Corey decided to back down too late, and this jeopardized his well-being and life. Best regards, reader of the CHWK Times." End quote. What was the meaning of this strange letter? What did the author want to say? By the way, the quote mentioned in the letter belongs not to Shakespeare, but to another British playwright, William Congreve. Is it possible that the letter was just sent by some nutty troll, or is there a hint hidden within the letter?
The letter, when they opened up, this is what it said. It said, "Dear Mr. Mrs. Sherby, Shakespeare said, hell hath no fury than a woman scorned." That's the kind of homicide it was, a scorned woman. Those who know, and it's all capitalized, know it was, belonged to too tight a group to say a word. I think your son Corey decided too late to back off, and it jeopardized his well-being, his life. Sincerely, a reader of the Chilliwick Times. The Chilliwick Times is a local newspaper here. And that was such a shock to us. So I like, what?
The anonymous letter, it was typewritten and photocopied, I believe. I don't know what it means, but it sure sounds like somebody is telling the Sherbys that this was a murder. It's mysterious and it's a little bit cryptic, but I mean, it's basically saying that he was messing with somebody's girlfriend and he got killed over it. I don't know if that's true, and that's certainly a theory, and it's certainly a plausible theory in the world we live in. So, yeah, seeing that letter really reopened the case as a journalist, let's put it that way, that I had closed. I think the letter is credible, and if it's not credible, it is so despicable of a practical joke that it's hard to fathom. And I don't understand why anybody would do that to Ed and Gladys. So it's either irresponsible or despicable, or it's true.
My thoughts on this letter is somebody definitely knew something to type up this letter and mail it to Ed and Gladys. But unfortunately, when they took it to the police didn't take much credence to this letter. But in my opinion, there was somebody that knew something here and wanted to tell Ed and Gladys that they weren't off track when in their thoughts that there was foul play. Their son was murdered.
After years in which the Corey Sherby family continued to send letters to various authorities, the case finally got underway at the end of 2019. It was announced that the Sherby family has the right to go to court and demand to show them all the documents in the case of their son's death. The results of this will be made public no earlier than April 2020.
Dr. Christopher Green is a medical doctor and a fellow at the American Academy of Forensic Sciences. His area of expertise contains a very unique mix of both medical expertise and also criminology expertise. So he's been contractor for various branches of the American government, including the CIA. Dr. Green was troubled by the explanation as to the cause of death that the coroner had reported and that the forensic pathologist had reported. He felt that some of the suspicious circumstances were not taken into account, particularly the state of decomposition of the body appeared to be inconsistent with the time of death. There was a metabolite in Corey's liver that suggested that sometime prior to his death, he had metabolized some cocaine. There was also alcohol in his system. However, the toxicology report pointed out that there's often alcohol in a decomposed body because the body, as it naturally breaks down, some alcohol is produced. So there was some alcohol, not independently enough to cause death. There was some metabolite of cocaine possibly being consumed before death, but significantly, there was no actual cocaine in the liver tissue. There was a test of 0 for cocaine, suggesting that whatever cocaine he had already been metabolized. Dr. Green did not feel that the levels of alcohol and cocaine metabolite present in Corey Sherby's system were sufficient to cause death. One possibility that he could not exclude and that he concluded was the most likely cause of death was some form of suffocation or strangulation. And he based that on a review of several academic articles where bodies were found in unusually advanced states of decomposition, and there was evidence of suffocation or starvation of oxygen as a causing or contributing factor to the death. So based on that, and based on what Dr. Green referred to as an unnatural position in which the body was found, he was of the view that the most likely cause of death was suffocation.
I cannot believe the police didn't follow through and tested and investigated thoroughly, that they came to that quick conclusion and stayed to that. That's the baffling thing, because there's so many other scenarios out there that just doesn't make sense. Did his real estate investments leave him in a financial bind? Did something happen there that we didn't know about with this letter that was sent to Ed and Gladys? Who says those things? That's what's baffling me, and is all this stuff keeps unsurfacing. Even 2 years ago, somebody at the courthouse came up to Ed and said that Corey was murdered and gave a name of a person.
After many, many years of waiting, the police complaint commissioner for the RCMP came out with a report determining that the Royal Canadian Mounted Police had conducted an inadequate investigation. It was not a reasonably thorough investigation into this death, and ordered the Chilliwick RCMP to apologize to the Sherby family. The real problem with the inquest is 9 years after the fact, by the time it occurred, this was already well into the category of a cold case. The human witnesses who testified had very limited recollection of what had happened 9 years previous. Most of the physical evidence had been destroyed. So it was really just a very limited process of re-interviewing the witnesses in front of the jury and looking at the photographs. Significantly and very disappointingly to the Sherby family, the coroner made a decision that Dr. Green was not qualified to testify because he's not a forensic pathologist. He's a medical doctor and a criminologist, but he doesn't examine dead bodies for a living. And the coroner found that the only experts who should be allowed to testify are people who examine dead bodies for a living. It's unfortunate that it took 9 years to get to the point where they would even have a fact-finding process. And the sad irony is that when that happened, the facts were largely no longer there to be found. In the end, their verdict was that this was an accidental death caused by cocaine and alcohol intoxication. And the only recommendation they made is that in future cases, the police should collect available evidence at the scene of a death. Really, the only hope of any breakthrough would be if some human source who knew something were to come forward and say something.
Ed and Gladys absolutely believed that somebody murdered their son. And I believe it was totally foul play. And somebody was there and something went wrong. Somebody did do something to Corey that night. The RCMP did not do a thorough investigation. If they did, we would have had more answers and maybe not be sitting where we are today.
It's tragic for the Sherby family because without knowing what happened to Corey, it's been difficult for them to move on with their lives. This is a couple who've lived in the Chilliwick community for many years, hardworking family who deserve to enjoy their retirement. But as a result of what happened to Corey, they can't. To get something like this off one's mind is virtually impossible, even for an hour, let alone for a day or a week.
You go to bed feeling the same way and you get up in the morning thinking the same thing over and over, just like the first day it happened. There's something got to be going on. Somebody knows something. It's just something missing there. It would feel better if they catch somebody. Maybe things will change.
To this day, the girl who Corey's father saw him with the last time he was seen alive has never been identified or located, so we may never really know her true involvement in all of this. Tammy's death was ruled as accident, although given what is known about the case, I doubt her death was anything but homicide and was not accidental, and no one knows who killed Corey or the reason why. To this day, the deaths of Corey Sherby and Tammy Burton remain unsolved. With that, this case remains open, but with many unanswered questions that still remain unanswered. Please rate this show and let me know what you guys think about this and the many other cases I have covered. You can follow me on all major social media platforms, YouTube, BitChute, Dailymotion. I'm also on Twitter and Instagram, links are all down below in the description. If you have a case you'd like me to have a look at or cover, don't hesitate to send me a message. I'm your host, and this has been the Unanswered Questions Podcast. Until next time. Next on Unanswered Questions. Denver International Airport, locally known as DIA, is an international airport in the western United States, primarily serving metropolitan Denver, Colorado, as well as the Greater Front Range urban corridor.